I watched a movie last night called Detachment. It's a good watch actually, depending on your temperament. It's about a supply teacher, a guy who goes in when the school is short of a teacher. And he goes into a particular school where there's a lot of fairly disturbed kids. All of these kids are responding to pressure. It has a fairly good list of actors actually. Even Bryan Cranston, Walter White from Breaking Bad, he was in it. And these kids are coping in the best way they can. So there's a case of a girl who goes into school very scantily clad. She's got almost nothing on the top half of her body. And the teacher pulls her aside and just says to her, "Show me your nipples." And she looks at him and says, "No." And he says, "Well, you are doing anyway." Because the thing she was wearing was so flimsy. But what's she responding to? She's responding to pressure. The pressure to be attractive to boys. The pressure to compete with other girls, to be more attractive than the other girls, or to get more attention than the other girls. And there's a guy who's, Mr. Tough Guy, and he is just responding to the pressure to display some kind of power, some kind of strength. But he doesn't know how to do it in any other way than through violence. And then there's another girl who's permanently put down by her father, who in the end commits suicide. So it's not, a jolly happy film, but it is a quite moving film. Anyway, the reason I mentioned that is because many, many young people, well, people generally, but particularly young people, feel under a great deal of pressure to perform in certain ways. I'm going to go through it all. But I think what people need to learn is that they don't actually have to respond to that pressure. The pressures are there all right, but you don't have to respond to it, and there are ways to deal with it. If the world was such that people were raised and taught that their own needs, their real needs, come first, then they wouldn't respond to pressure. They'd just say, well, fuck all that. I'm not really interested in being the most attractive girl in the school. The guys can go, or whatever. And similarly, Mr. Tough Guy, he would just say to himself, well, I am what I am. If people don't like it, then it's tough. But people are not like that. You take the world of social media, and it's worth pointing out that suicide rates among teenagers have doubled over the past 10 or 15 years. Why? Because they get onto social media. Everybody makes these huge efforts to look glamorous and attractive. And then other people measure themselves against it and feel typically inadequate. Go onto TikTok, there's millions of young men and young girls who must have spent hours getting ready for their little TikTok appearance to make themselves look as happy, attractive and charming and all the rest of it as possible. That's incredible pressure. Anyway, I'll have more to say about that later. So, what are typically the pressures on young people? Well, one of the main pressures is to look good. Why do people need to look good? Well, it's just nature using us. Because as far as nature is concerned, you are just a vehicle all of us are just vehicles for reproduction. And of course, when you get into your late teens and early 20s, then that's really, really important. It's said that young men think about sex every minute or so. It's just nature driving us on to procreate, to have kids, to perpetuate the species. So we have to look good. I've gone through the evolutionary psychology stuff before, but I will mention a bit of it here and there. Um, so it's said that for women, the most attractive age is 20 because they have the greatest reproductive potential when they're 20 years old. I mean, men don't think to themselves, oh, I really like her, she's got the greatest reproductive potential. It's all programmed in, it's all instinctive. So men typically, not always, but so these things I'm going to say apply to many people, but not to everybody. But men, typically look for a woman who's around 20. Even younger men will look for a woman who's around 20. So the research says anyway. So to look good. For men, it's slightly different. They do need to look good, but they also need to show that they're powerful and successful. Not to be a loser. The greatest insult that you can pile upon any man, as far as his mating possibilities are concerned, is to say that he's a loser. So these are the pressures that are on young people. They've always been there, but they're amplified by social media. People trying to outcompete each other on TikTok or Facebook or wherever. I wanted this to be short. It isn't going to be short. As far as Facebook is concerned, as you know, a lot of older people use Facebook. How do they try and outcompete each other? They try to portray that they're happier and more successful than everybody else. So they'll take photographs of every restaurant they've been to. They'll take photographs of every holiday they've been on. Or take photographs of being with their mates to show that they're popular, happy people and all the rest of it. When of course, many of them are not. But that's the image they have to portray. When I speak to people that I know about Facebook, I always call it brag book because that's essentially what it is. So the pressures on young people vary whether you are male or female. For girls, it's looking good, to look happy, to be cute, charming, all of the things that nature requires from a young woman for her to attract the best mates. So, for example, why do men, or many men, like long legs in women? It turns out that women with long legs tend to have more kids. So men are unconsciously looking for the best mating partner. Of course, they don't see it like that, but that's what's happening. I could give you lots of this stuff, but I've covered it before. Anyway, for girls, it's mainly about looks, hence the massive cosmetics industry. For boys, it's to be successful, to be powerful, to look good, hence, not only boys, but women as well, men and women go to the gym to look as good as they can. It's all about vanity in the main. Not to be a loser. To call a man a loser is the worst thing you can say. And they have to be funny and charming. Why funny and charming? Well, to attract females. To be entertaining. There's a lot I could say about that as well, but I'm not going to dwell on it. So let's just talk about this pressure. All of these things I've mentioned, to look good, to be successful, not to be a loser, be funny and charming, all of these pressures come from the outside. It's a competitive situation. And young people who've never been told, or people in general who've never been told, well, actually, you don't have to listen to all that stuff, or actually pay any attention to it. They've never been told that, so they're driven by nature to be the most attractive or the most successful or whatever, and never question it. It's just nature using them. But you don't have to be like that. You can, well, there's two or three things that people really ought to do. One is they need to start understanding the nature of the world. Read any book on evolutionary psychology, it'll give you a very, very good insight into the forces that are driving you, particularly as a young person. They're nothing to do with you, it's just nature. Nature doesn't care about you, you're just a vehicle for reproduction. So, first thing, we need to understand ourselves and the world, the way the world operates, and then ourselves. How are we responding to all these pressures? And that's not easy. It requires the ability to observe yourself, really. Well, how am I feeling when I look at these gorgeous people on TikTok? Oh yeah, I can feel it. I'm feeling a bit envious, a bit inadequate. And you just need to see that. You don't need to try and change anything. Seeing it is most of the story, in truth, because when you see it, it starts to lose its power a little bit when you understand what's going on. And in fact, that is the essence of understanding things. The more you understand things, the less power those things will have over you. But kids are not raised to understand evolutionary psychology or to understand the forces that are driving them. The whole of society is geared around shaping individuals into the kind of creatures that it wants. Not creatures that are happy or people that are happy, but people that serve society as a whole. And if you look at what society is, it depends where you live, but if you look at society in the main, it's basically millions and millions of people serving a few very rich people. So you need to be conforming to all the dictates of society. Otherwise you're seen as a bit aberrant. Anyway, I've got a quote that I'm going to read out in a moment. So, start to understand the world. Start to understand yourself and how you're reacting to things. And become conscious of these forces that are acting upon you. The need to be seen as a happy boy or girl. Why do you feel the need to conform with that? Well, there's a reason. I don't want to go into all these reasons, but I'll talk about that one just for a moment. So, if you look happy, you are signaling to the world that you are thriving well. And everybody wants to give that image, because if you give the opposite image, that you're not thriving well, you make yourself vulnerable to well, I was going to use the word attacks. It's not really attacks, but you make yourself vulnerable to a lower opinion in other people's eyes. Oh, look, he's not very happy, is he? Oh, yeah, well, something must be going wrong in that person's life. Let's stay away from that person, because if you've noticed nature, animals don't really hang around other animals that are injured or not thriving. It's the same thing. So people want to be part of the herd, but there's a big price to pay. You have to look happy. You have to be successful. You have to be attractive. All of those things. Well, you can say to yourself, I don't want to be part of the herd. And all of a sudden those pressures, to some extent anyway, fall away. They only really fall away when you understand them. But you just need to wise up, basically. How many people are going to do that? Well, not a lot. The forces, the pressures of society and biology are so great that we spend nearly all our time trying to service those pressures. And the really important thing to realize is that those pressures are coming from outside. So, if you can moderate the effect of those pressures and start to listen to your own needs, then you can start to live the life as you want it, not as society or the people around you or whatever want. I deal with, and my wife particularly deals with, a lot of people who don't want these pressures. And the thing that they report over and over again is that once they start to stand their ground and don't just become puppets driven by nature or society or whatever, other people see that strength. And guess what? If you don't play the herd game, other people will be more attracted to you. Not that you necessarily want it, but that's the way it works. A weak person, somebody who's trying to please people or whatever, is not attractive, despite the fact that that's how we're driven by nature and society. Anyway, I said I didn't want this to be long. I could have gone on for probably an hour with this because it's a major interest of mine. Anyway, for a number of years, about 5 years in actual fact, I was involved with Gestalt psychotherapy. It's not all that fashionable these days, although I think it's becoming a little bit more fashionable again. And the guy who was the main driving force behind it, a guy called Fritz Perls, had a great little prayer, and I'll recite it. I do my thing, and you do your thing. I am not in this world to live up to your expectations, and you are not in this world to live up to mine. You are you, and I am I. And if by chance we find each other, it's beautiful. If not, it can't be helped. It's just the way it is. You don't exist in this world to conform with all the external pressures that you feel upon you. That requires courage and it requires knowledge. But somebody who lives in that way, and I know this from practical experience of dealing with other people, as does my wife, if you can live like that, you become happier, and actually other people will become more interested in you, which is oddly enough the thing you wanted in the first place, but you have to reject those outside forces and start to live from your own needs and desires.